Hello, last session of the day. How's everybody doing? All right. So welcome to Metadata Unified Theory. You've got physics and bits all worked out. My name is Jack Brighton. I'm with the Institute for Nonprofit News, along with various public broadcasting organizations. I'm your moderator for this session, and I'm going to manage the time, and we're going to have a great discussion. We have an amazing lineup of folks here, and the topic, PBCore, EBUCore, the unification of these standards across the oceans and the planet, and maybe the galaxy and beyond. Casey Davis from WGBH is going to lead us off. She's the project manager for the American Archive Project. We're very excited to have Jean-Pierre Evian here he's the principal project manager at EBU, and he is the EBUCore guy. So, and he's made a couple of trips to the United States to help us work out this grand unification of PBCore and EBUCore, and we're going to talk about that today. Rebecca Framo is also from WGBH. She's deeply involved in the American Archive Project and the PBCore project as well. And last but not least, George Blood from George Blood Audio, Video, and Film. And he's going to talk in depth about some of the technical aspects of this unification and what it means for possibilities of software and use, and et cetera. So I'm going to get out of the way. Let Casey take the first session here.
Hello, I'm Casey Davis, as Jack introduced me. Thank you, Jack. From WGBH, I work as the project manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Before I get started, can everyone, if you were here at the PBCore session last year, can you raise your hand? Okay, so not that many of you. Well, those of you who were here, you will get a lot of updates. We have been very active over the last year, thanks to all of the volunteers and our American Archive staff, especially Rebecca and Sadie, who have spent a lot of their time working on the PBCore program development. And so for those of you who were not here, you should probably be surprised that PBCore is back in action. That's 3 words, not 2. So today I'm just going to talk for like 5 minutes because these guys have a lot more to say about what's been going on over the last year. So let's see, I can't see my notes here. So what is PBCore? Can you raise your hand if you are familiar with PBCore? Okay. Raise your hand if you're familiar with EBUCore. Okay. So PBCore, you probably already know this, but it was developed in the early 2000s by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's the institution that provided initial funding for PBCore. PBCore was developed out of a need by United States public broadcasters to develop a core schema, an XML schema, so that we could speak the same language and share metadata within our institutions and external to our institutions among public broadcasters. Since the early 2000s, PBCore has been updated. There was PBCore 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2.0, and now we're at 2.1. But during that time, CPB provided quite a bit of funding for the further development. There was also a time when PBCore kind of went dormant for a while. There were still PBCore users, but it didn't have a very active and engaged community of supporters. But that has not been the case for at least the last 2 years. We have, let's see. So, yeah. PBCore, as you probably all also know, is an extension of Dublin Core. PBCore is a metadata schema for audio and video materials and provides descriptive metadata, technical metadata, and intellectual property metadata. It's an XML schema primarily, but it has been used by public broadcasters as a way to develop their own internal databases. It's also used as a lot of public broadcasters still in the United States are only inventorying their collections with a spreadsheet, but it provides a standard framework for them to get a handle on what they have and use the same language as other public broadcasters. But as you know, from the audience here, you can tell that PBCore has also been adopted by a lot of the moving image archival community, and through that we've been able to develop a PBCore advisory subcommittee of the cataloging and metadata committee of the Association of Moving Image Archivists, thanks to Thelma Ross, who helped us get that through about a year ago or a year and a half ago. So it is continued to be maintained by WGBH and the PBCore Advisory Subcommittee. When the Corporation for Public Broadcasting selected WGBH and the Library of Congress to be the permanent stewards of the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, in addition to those responsibilities, we were also tasked with further development, maintenance, and support of PBCore. So we thought immediately that the best way to ensure the further maintenance and support of PBCore is to actively engage the people who are using it and kind of stake in its further development. So what is the vision of the PBCore Advisory Subcommittee and the PBCore community at large? We think that our vision is obviously to continue to maintain and support the PBCore XML schema, understanding that you'll hear later about our work with EBU to develop a harmonized RDF ontology, but we are very aware that most PBCore users will never use, probably in my lifetime, maybe not, move into the area of the Semantic Web, which Jean-Pierre will talk more about. But we are also continuing to educate public media organizations and the archival community about PBCore. There is still a lot of work to be done within public broadcasting to develop an understanding of what metadata even is and how to use it, when and why it's important. So in addition to continuing to engage the archival community, we see it as a core responsibility to ensure that public broadcasters are continuing to improve their understanding of the schema. Also, ensure continued PBCore integration into existing metadata management systems and tools. So PBCore has been used by, as I said, public broadcasters and archival institutions to maintain their own metadata management systems, some of which are open source and some are proprietary, but we want to continue to ensure that PBCore is updated as we continue to further develop the schema. Also continue outreach to the community, and also finally to provide a way for PBCore users to implement the use of Semantic Web and RDF, which is a resource description framework, which Jean-Pierre is the expert on that, so I will let him talk all about that. So why did we decide to collaborate with European Broadcasters Union? Maybe like 2 years ago when WGBH became the permanent stewards of PBCore, we developed the PBCore Advisory Subcommittee, and we said, we're going to develop our own RDF ontology. Well, we quickly realized that we do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many standards already out there, and creating more and more standards just continues to confuse things and does not integrate the work of archivists across the country and internationally. So how have we worked with EBU? We have had a couple of initial hackathons, one here in Portland about 6 months ago, one on Cape Cod. We had hackathons to develop an initial mapping from PBCore XML to EBUCore RDF. I don't think I've completely explained why it's important for us to integrate and to harmonize. Now that a lot of us are making a lot of our collections available online, and we have the opportunity to further disseminate our collections, it's not only important for us to be speaking the same language internationally as archivists, so that we understand what our colleagues are doing and how they're describing their materials in other countries, but it's also a responsibility to our users to help them find what they're looking for. So that's one of the important reasons for collaboration. And one other thing that I wanted to say about there being too many standards. Did you know that there is an international standards organization, International Standards Day? The United States does not even celebrate ISO Standards Day. National Standards Day. So that's just an example of why there needs to be more unification. And now I will hand it over to Jean-Pierre.
Hello, nice to be here with you, and we're going to talk about EBUCore, of course, and PBCore. So different things I'm going to touch. It's a big challenge to speak about 20 years of work in 15 minutes or so. I'm going to touch everything very lightly, and if you want to talk with me sometime after this presentation, you are welcome. I give you my business card, you can send email. I respond to emails from anyone in the world. So with EBU, probably you don't know what is EBU. EBUCore is a nutshell, very, very, very small nutshell. Compared to EBUCore and EBUCore, equally small, okay? And a few more things about semantics, and then I will tell you where you can find the EBUCore, PBCore here. So the European Broadcasting Union, it's actually the largest professional association of broadcasters in the world. We have more than 150 broadcasters coming together in EBU. And we have the Eurovision, which is a big song contest, right, with 300 million viewers. So you can see the Super Bowl in comparison. And so we do news, we do sport, a lot of sport and news. Right? So that's important for studying, and I'm spending really almost 80% of my time working on RTF for sports. Right? So that's really important for us. And we have offices everywhere, including in Washington, in New York. But we have our colleagues working for us and providing news. EBUCore in a nutshell. Right. So what is EBUCore? It's based on EBUCore. We are using most of the EBUCore elements like title, alternative title, and all these things. But of course, when we have been discussing with people, originally from the archive, but now EBUCore can be used for many other things than just the archive. Because for instance, we are doing it in a project that is called Films, on which we are doing new architectures for production, for audiovisual production, and EBUCore is used there. But when we discussed with the guy at the very beginning of EBUCore, then think about having just one field, one string that allows you to describe the format of an audiovisual content. Of course, nonsense. So we have to extend the format element. We have to extend the rights element, we have to extend the type element. And we have added a few actual things like publication history, rating, all that sort of things. Publication history, for instance, that has been used to populate some schema.org stuff. Around the publication, if you go on schema.org, you will find the publication. It comes largely from here. And we have this new audio model, I'll show you more in a second. And we are in so many different organizations, we have so many broadcasters, or archives, or universities using it. It's keeping my time busy. The audio model. In fact, we have not been working on an audio model for years, for some reason. You know, when we were in the EBU, for instance, people from the radio say, you always forget radio, and you always speak about television. And then when you try to do something for the radio, people will say, I do something specific and special. All right? So after all these years, finally, we got people from France, people from the UK, people from Norway, and we said we have to work on a new audio model because now object audio is coming. So, for instance, people would say 3D audio or immersive audio, but that's not the only reason for which you would do object audio. There are many other things that you can carry into objects. So this new audio model is really moving forward. It has been adopted by the ITU, but you can imagine that there are many discussions with companies like Dolby, DTS, who are doing all sorts of lobbying in different places. But still, this one is free, and it's open. Now, a very short comparison between EBUCore and PBCore. If you look at this, well, it doesn't come out very well. But if you look at the diagram from PBCore on the web, you will find that there is the asset on one side, there is the instance on the other side, with two different colors. Actually, in EBUCore, you will find something that is very similar. It's organized differently, but you also have the possibility to describe business objects or editorial objects and instances through the formats. But although we have been discussing this, finally we decided not to harmonize at the schema level, because when you look at the schema, they are done differently. Okay? There are a few things, like the part element, which has appeared into PBCore and all of things, but other than that, when you try to make the comparison or the harmonization between this editorial object or the asset and the instance, then that's more difficult. So let's keep the schemas living their own life, okay? And I think the communities of people who are using the respective schemas are going to be happy about it. We are not going to ask them to adopt things that would not be backward compatible. And in fact, the other option is a semantic model. Because these notions of asset, instance, and there are many different objects that can be described in this metadata. And in fact, the EBUCore doesn't say what is the object that is being described. Okay? You say that through the type, and you say this is the type of object I'm describing. It could be a series, it could be a program, it could be a document, it could be an image, it could be whatever. So we have these notions of objects with asset, editable object, essence, etc. So thinking of object takes you back into the way semantic modeling is done. So that's why I propose to have harmonization at the RDF level more than at the schema level. And it works very well like this. Many good reasons to go for semantic. How many of you have been using semantic metadata? Yes, so that's why I said I'm going to put 1 or 2 slides to explain what is semantic just in case. Well, it's more than just in case. So, web semantic. It's a big word, and I'm trying to tell you to take you through that and try to tell you in 5 minutes why you should go for web and semantic metadata. When I said I was working on sport, for instance, so I'm working on different RDF models, and the most difficult for me is to get data. Okay. So you see, we are a big producer of sport content, and if I want to make a proof of concept, of course, I do get my content from YouTube. But if I ask my colleague to give me content, then I can wait for years. Sure, yeah, that's a fact. And it's the same for data. So I'm telling them, improve the workflow. Where is your data coming from? So for instance, I did something on Baku, which is a big event, and it's something like 32 different sports. So my model is supporting these 32 different sports. I told the guys, give me the data. So that is 6 months that are telling me, it is somewhere, right? So I will never get it. But when I get it, they tell me, well, okay, here is my database done. Oh, nice. When they are cool enough, and when the data is formatted like decided by the IOC, by the ODF model, then it's easy because I know it and I know what to look for. So when I use a sort of tools to parse the database, I can start doing something. But if you get the database done for the first time, and if you want to learn about what is the data that is inside, good luck. Right? It's really difficult, right? That's why I am suggesting that the best reason for doing semantic is stop mining, go surface. I will show you why, what I mean by surfing. Because you are suddenly going to navigate through your data. You are going to surf through your living data. It's much easier, much nicer. And you don't need to learn about the done. In fact, you just go through your data. And anyway, it's much more attractive, visually speaking. So what happens is that suddenly your black box opens, and you have a number of objects which are all linked. So what is good with this semantic data is that you can make a text search. You start somewhere inside your model, and from there you can navigate through your model. Okay, and then you are lost, or you did not find what you wanted, so you make a search, you start from somewhere else, and again you can navigate through your model. So it's not all magic, it has all to do with the model that you have developed that allows you to do this. Okay. But it is really nice. I'm doing, again, another proof of concept around sports. And you know, in the past there were some things I would say, why did I put my finger into this, right? And for semantic data, every damn thing is so cool. It is so good. This is saving my life. So, yeah, I'm trying to convince you here. That's right. So, for those who know nothing about semantic data, you know, in the 80s, you had all these managing courses and management courses, etc., where people would say, oh, amaze me, surprise me, or describe something into 2 or 3 sentences, probably because they were lacking some brain. I don't know how to say that. I've been thinking about it for a while, but all right. And in fact, if you think about it, you can describe almost anything with simple sentences. So of course, it's going to be verbose, because instead of using a very complex sentence, you are going to use a few sentences. But make the exercise, you can describe almost anything with simple sentences made of a subject, a verb, and a complement. The difference in semantic is that you have two sorts of sentences. You have relations between resources, between objects, and you also have the characterization of objects with properties like strings, booleans, integers, that sort of things. With this, you can do everything you want. So I've given you an example that I'm using here for sports, and it looks like XML, because that is an XML serialization of RDF, okay? But you do not read it the same way. So if you want to think in terms of sentences with that sort of things, you would say, this is my subject, as a type, athlete, okay? As a label, Coinciding from Poland. I should have taken another name because I can't pronounce it. As print name, Coinciding again, as an international federation ID, this number, etc. So that's how you read it. A number of sentences of statements about what you're describing, and in this case you're describing an athlete. And with that, you can really do many things. It's simple and it's elegant. And frankly speaking, I started something like 9 years ago, and 9 years ago you had no tool. So I was really writing this by hand using a text editor. So I was really scratching my head. You had a few validators on the internet, on the web, okay. And you would enter that sort of things into a validator, and you got a long message that was absolutely cryptic, saying more or less, well, you are doomed. It's not working. For what reason? Try to guess by yourself. All right, so that is so. Do not criticize my kid for doing websites. It's really not my business, but I'm doing this just for illustrating the purpose, you know. So when I'm saying that you are surfing on your data, that means that each time that you are doing that sort of things, if I click on this, I go on to the description of a competition. If I click on this, I go on the description of this athlete. So everything is related. So I make a simple text search here. So I have different things here. I did a search on results. I could have put a few characters, and in this case I could make a filter, and I would get only 2 results. Okay? And then I navigate through my data. So if my model is well done, I can really explore the entire set of data using this semantic approach. And today I just finished. I did a small sparkle endpoint. I'm very happy. Did he display the results of any query completely open with sparkle endpoint using this? I'm quite happy. So if you and PBCore have come together now, and we have decided to extend EBUCore RDF. So actually it's EBUCore RDF to which we have added a number of properties so that people who are using PBCore could more easily map into EBUCore RDF. That's the approach that we have decided to go. So that's when I said we have these objects, so media resources, essences, which are like instances, with the editorial object, etc. So these are all the different objects that can be described by EBUCore or PBCore now, using RDF. And this diagram is actually 90% EBUCore, and we have now extensions for what we call the class data, the conceptual class data model that we use for describing workflows. So you see, it's not only archives, we can also describe workflows. And now we are working with a big international association in Europe of sales houses, and we are working on advertising workflows. So we are making a lot of work on this. And this is why now we have these different classes, and many of them are common to PBCore because we have the agent, with the contract organization, etc., etc. So that's why we decided to go for RDF, because there is so much in common. And where do you find it? So when you set up a website where you publish that sort of RDF content, you have different options for setting up your server. So my choice was to go for priority to the documentation. So that if you know nothing about semantic, then you do not fall onto the .rdf file where you say, oh my God. So no, documentation first. Long list of contributors now thanks to the PBCore community. We have many American names here, in addition to European names. And we have mentioned that now this is done in collaboration between the EBUCore and PBCore community. And that's very nice. And if you want to get the RDF, you just add the .rdf at the end, EBUCore.rdf, and you get it. Right? So now, well, I could speak about this for one day or more. But this is an XML serialization of RDF. And some people would say, one of the stories that you hear, so some people would have told me not so long ago, or why don't you go for Turtle, for instance, okay? And it's true that if ever you had a triple store that is full of RDF serialized in XML, and maybe at the end of the day you would like to transform this data into Turtle because it's going to be, that's text, so it's going to be small at the end of the day, very practically speaking. But for me, this is really one of the best formats because most of my data is coming in XML, and I can use the XML tools to make XSLT transforms and go into RDF. So I prefer that format. And then the same people who told me, who were telling me, oh, you should go for Turtle, they are now using RDFA, which is even more verbose than XML. Right? So I have heard almost all and everything. I'm not surprised by anything anymore. So, 2 more links. I'm just done. I'm just about to be finished with my presentation. 2 more links. Now EBUCore is listed as an RDF vocab for Ruby. So I think people are working on Hydra and Fedora 4 right now are also looking at Ruby. So it's there. And it has been checked by people from the Penn State University. So there were not so many things wrong actually. And it's also listed as part of the linked open vocabulary. So that's a repository where you can find a lot of information. And these are all the different things. These were also, only on this I could spend one day. So some people are saying it's linked data, but you have to reduce things coming from other vocabularies. It's mandatory. It's mandatory. I'm not sure it's mandatory because, in fact, if you reduce too many things from too many different vocabularies, for instance, a request to a Sparkle endpoint is going to be made through a REST call to a server. And the URL, the size of the URL is limited. So only by declaring all the prefixes, you are going to hit most of the capacity for your query. So it's not necessarily a good thing. Let's say that like it is politically correct. Well, one day we could speak about it. We continue. A lot of work to be done. So we have already added a few properties to the EBUCore RDF to meet the requirements from the PBCore community. We are going to work on mappings to go from the XML to RDF. And of course, we are going to continue working together in trying to see what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and if we can agree on the way to do it. It's a lot of conditions. And I think that's it. So if you want to contact me anytime, send me an email, very easy, and I respond.
I'm Rebecca Freeman, so we're going to stop surfing for a minute and go back to mining. We're going to talk about the updates to the PBCore XML schema over the course of the past year, including some of the work that's been done to incorporate our partnership with EBUCore along the way.
So I titled this presentation, Are We There Yet? Because this was a question we asked ourselves many, many times over the course of trying to update PBCore 2.0. So right now, PBCore 2.1, just to provide an overview, it's an updated XML schema which is designed to allow more flexibility in more archives using PBCore. We've updated the class and property definitions to be more usable and less ambiguous, because we know that we had a lot of comments on people asking how we were defining this particular asset or this particular term, which has a number of definitions, no matter where you look in the ones that were originally written, were providing a lot of problems for people. So we cleaned those up. We're in the process of cleaning up the controlled vocabularies, and we're hoping that it's going to make it a lot easier to use the schema. We've also made it easier to access the schema. We have a more usable website which is going to showcase our new schema and our updated definitions. We have new visualizations, example records, and updated FAQ. And we're posting constantly webinars and blog posts to explain all the schema changes and clarify some of the things that people have asked us to make decisions on. And then in the end, we realized we couldn't exactly make decisions on because different archives do things different ways. We wanted to clarify what the different possibilities were for making sure that PBCore 2.1 was that any archive who wanted to use it could kind of make sure that it was tailored to their needs within their institution. So this is our beautiful updated visualization, one of our many tools to try and make it easier to understand how PBCore is used. So if you remember, if you were at the PBCore session last year, we kind of came to the consensus that while PBCore was a great and necessary standard to be used to describe moving image assets, there was still a lot of work that needed to be done. This is a slide that I stole from Mary Miller's presentation last year about how she loved PBCore, she needed PBCore needed to change. So we put out a call to users of PBCore to ask how they wanted PBCore to change. We did this through GitHub, we opened up issues, and we invited anyone to submit an issue or a complaint about the schema and about the definitions, and about anything that they felt made it not particularly usable. So then after we put out that call, we put out a survey to the community. Last year we set up teams to work on trying to implement these changes so that we could update to PBCore 2.1. So we had the steering committee, which guides and manages the project. There's a website committee, which worked on our beautiful updated website, which I will show a slide of later. Schema to incorporate the schema changes to the structure of how the XML is put together. Documentation to incorporate the GitHub issues and suggestions to revise our definitions and documentation about how to use it. A vocabulary team, which split off from the documentation team when we realized that we had to do a lot of work just on the controlled vocabularies alone. And then communication and education to try and inform the rest of the PBCore community and the rest of the world about all the work that we've been doing. So this is an example of one of our spreadsheets to examine the schema issues that were brought in through GitHub. So we put them on the spreadsheet, and then we would have many, many meetings to discuss the issues and try and figure out what we ought to do about them, and if there really was a way that we could resolve the problem by changing the schema, if it was something that we could do within an update to 2.1 that would still be backwards compatible to the previous versions of the schema, or if it was going to be such a sweeping change that we didn't really feel comfortable making it just yet until we were making a bigger step forward and bringing the community with us. So our official criteria when considering a change to the structure of the XML were, first of all, we look at the problems and challenges that were brought up on the GitHub account. We try and figure out what issues really required a change to the overall schema and what could just be settled by clarifying something in the documentation or the FAQ or the website, whether it was really just a question that people were unsure about or if it was really a problem that people were having. And finally, we decided that for PBCore 2.1, it had to be completely backwards compatible with 2.0. When we do a 3.0, which is coming in the future, there might be changes that make it not backwards compatible. But for the time being, we don't want to make anyone's metadata invalid who has been using PBCore throughout all the various iterations that it has gone through over the years. So this is an example of our documentation spreadsheet as we kind of tried to come up with new, clear definitions for all of the various elements within PBCore. So you'd start out, the kind of workflow process of going through this was you'd start out with a GitHub issue. Here's one example. The schema team would discuss it and try and figure out if a schema change was needed. More often than not, we'd figure out that actually this is something that could probably be clarified with improved documentation and say, this is not our problem anymore, and pitch it to the documentation team. being on both the schema and documentation teams, I got to bear a little bit of the brunt of this. But then, the documentation team would pick it up. We'd evolve the documentation to address the issue. And then finally, we'd have a finalized new definition as it looks on our beautiful new website. And along the way, we were also incorporating the work that was done with the EBUCore ontology harmonization. So we'd figure out what the terminology was in EBUCore. We were trying to determine what our terms were, what our definition was, and what our controlled vocabulary was, and try and streamline it in such a way that we were selecting terms and definitions that were more easily mappable to EBUCore RDF. So that as we're kind of working together to harmonize the schemas in an RDF ontology, we don't have to worry too much about well, there isn't an exact match for this term in the controlled vocabulary that people might use for PB correlation and instantiation relation. We've got one, we know our controlled vocabulary list matches up exactly to what's in EBUCore. Or we'd go back to EBUCore and say, we really need this relation type, and you guys don't have it. Can you add that to can you make that a property in the EBUCore ontology so that when we get there, it's going to be easier to map? So finally, I'm going to talk about what we actually did end up changing about the schema. It wasn't very much, but we hope that it's going to be significant to make it just more easily usable for people. So first of all, we added source, ref, version, annotation, attributes to all elements in the schema. So anything that's in a PBCore record, you can now say where it came from and what the reference is. You provide a URI link, which again is going to make it a lot easier for people who want to transform to link data eventually if there's URI for everything, because the semantic web is very reliant on having specific your unique record identifiers to ground that data and link it all together. Second, when users are asked to be able to provide source, ref, version, annotation for attributes in an XML schema, you can't actually have another attribute on an attribute. And a lot of our information in the schema is within attributes. We created new attribute groups right now, which is kind of clunky. So, PBCore part type is an attribute of PBCore part. And then we added another attribute group for part type source, part type ref, part type version, part type annotation, because you couldn't have an attribute on an attribute. So this is kind of a clunky way to be able to provide more URIs. And in 3.0, we might decide to revise this. But for right now, it keeps it backwards compatible. We added an optional units of measure attribute for the element's essence track, but then just because it was the only technical element that didn't allow you to say what the units of measure were. The elements instantiation language and essence track language are now repeatable. This is just another thing that people complained about because many kind of media items don't only have just one language in them. And finally, the requirement to use extension authority used with an extension wrap has been removed, although we still recommend it, so you don't actually have to have an authority in the XML schema. If you're doing an extension, you can use a local standard and it becomes more flexible to fit your organizational needs. I'm rushing through this a little bit because I'm running out of time, but I'll talk about this more at our PBCore committee meeting tomorrow.
When is it?
It's at noon. It's the president's suite upstairs in the committee room. And finally, we updated definitions of best practice documentation for all elements and attributes. So I just want to conclude. I'm running out of time, but I'm going to turn it over to George Blood to talk about some of the stuff that you can do with PBCore that's not just using our basic XML. So we spent a lot of work updating the XML schema because that is how many people store and transform their data. You can use it to create inventory spreadsheets. You can use it, we're trying to make sure that you can use it with RDF. You can use it to identify fields and terminology. You can incorporate it into other metadata standards without taking all of PBCore entirely. Our goal is just to be able to provide a better way for anyone to describe their AB assets without necessarily requiring that they use our schema hook, line, and sinker. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George Blood, who's been doing some really awesome things with PBCore.
Thank you, Rebecca. By the way, but before we start, I want to just give a shout out to Ryan Edge back there, I think, in the back, who designed the new PBCore logo. So thank you.
Thank you. Work on the website, which looks beautiful.
Thanks. Well, anyone who's been to a PBCore presentation recently knows that I am not Morgan Morell. I do not play Morgan Morrell on television. Morgan took rather ill and flew home early yesterday, and I get to attempt to fill in his shoes on this. And although I've given other people's presentations before, this one has given me some very interesting challenges in that regard. So I'm going to try to give this presentation, if I have to, I will read from his notes. Morgan is our IT systems administrator. He writes a lot of code for us. Morgan was a media major. He did film as an undergraduate. He went to the University of Michigan for graduate school and liked to write code on the side. So we have this great combination of somebody who lives and breathes media, who went to library school, so he understands all this stuff, and writes code. So it's a great asset that we have. He's been writing code for us since about 2012, and he writes the automation and workflow software that we use in our digitization. Our initial work in PBCore was somewhat simple, but in the last few years it's grown both in the number of institutions that are asking us to do this and the complexity that he's being asked to deliver. And as they became more complex and more frequent, he found that getting involved with the schema, he was involved in the education documentation schemes in the PBCore advisory subcommittee. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on an example of what PBCore can do in the wild. We'll start off by a discussion of how we decided to use PBCore in METS as a way of describing physical and digital video objects for Columbia University libraries. Next, we'll discuss some of the technical details of how we achieve that. And then, if you're still with me, we'll discuss why this matters to you and the archival community. The story begins. In 2008, when Columbia started working on a project for the Mellon Audio Preservation Project, this slides as well. PowerPoint is luncheon on this computers, on using two computers. There we go. This project was funded by the H.W. Mellon Foundation to digitize Columbia's oral history, specifically analog audio materials. The guidelines of the project laid out the groundwork for how audio objects will be identified and described by Columbia, processed and digitized, at audio, video, and film, at that time called Safe Sound Archive, and then ingested into Columbia's Fedora repository. This diagram was developed at the onset of the project to illustrate the information flow between the institutions. It's a little bit much, especially at that resolution. We're going to focus on this part of the workflow. Or we can simplify it even further. Essentially, far left, materials originate at Columbia coming out of their catalog. They gather up the analog tapes, export their catalog information, the descriptive information, send it to us. We digitize and send back the files, wrapping technical, administrative, and descriptive metadata in METS. This becomes their submission information packet that goes into their Fedora repository. And as part of this project, they were writing the Fedora repository as we were developing the workflow. So it was this concurrent development, and you get halfway through something kind of would work, you have to start all over again, so it was exciting. We can look at this more specifically. What we're going to talk about is this METS document that has the descriptive, technical, and the provenance information in it. The solution that we came up with is working with the metadata encoding transmission standard METS in XML documents for each intellectual unit. You know, to differentiate an intellectual unit from the object. So you have an oral history that's on 3 tapes, those 3 tapes are grouped together, or you may have a tape that has a different interview on each side that gets split into 2 separate units, or the very famous example of 13 tapes containing 7 interviews, and it's just this checkerboard. So we need to be able to capture all of these different variables. The Columbia uses the METS XML as part of their submission information package for the digital asset management system. This means that each ingest package includes all of the files associated with the intellectual unit, along with the METS documents that describe the audio files and their relationships to the original objects. So what does METS look like? Well, it looks like this. I know, maybe a bit small. Small? But believe you me, if you could see it, it looks very, very interesting. Since I'm giving somebody else's presentation. Just like with PBCore, METS information is stored in XML documents. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. XML is a data storage and transmission language that allows for hierarchical data structures. Numerous computer systems use XML to store, transmit, and publish various types of data, such as banking, weather, and geographical data. Because of this, a number of software systems exist to write, validate, and parse information themselves. So you just have to sit down in a text editor and write this stuff from scratch. The standardization of XML, along with the ability to describe hierarchical data relationships, makes it very popular in the archiving and preservation community. In fact, a number of metadata standards like EBUCore, PBCore, AES, EBUCore, Premise, all use XML to store data describing objects, assets, relationships, and processes. So back to METS. When Columbia developed how they wanted their METS to look for audio objects, it turned out looking like this. We'll give you a quick tour. The METS headers contain the agents, which in this case is Columbia University Libraries and George Flood Audio Video Film. The descriptive metadata section contains EBUCore descriptive metadata about the objects. This came from the Columbia catalog. The administrative metadata contains technical metadata about the digital audio files and the source metadata about the original analog objects. This metadata is expressed in AES X098B, which was chosen by Columbia. The technical metadata sections contain information like bit depth, duration, the number of channels, and file type about the digital audio files. The source metadata contains information like media type, dimensions, treatment, transfer notes about the original object. The file section contains a list of the files represented by the master METS file with their paths and associated checksums. Lastly, the structure map contains information about how the files map to the original objects and their relationships to each other. Columbia elected to omit the structure link and behavior sections in their schema. So we'll go through this one more time. The Columbia METS documents contains information about major agents involved, descriptive metadata about the content contained on the object, technical metadata about the digital and physical objects, and metadata that maps the digital files to their original objects. It is important to note that the data contained in the DMD sec and the AMD sec can be formatted however you wish. However, it's best to use a popular standard so that the data can be read by other institutions into the future. The AES X098B was chosen because it's what Jove will spit out when you give it an audio file. This makes the process easier to automate and provides a method of validating using trusted software. And so this is what we have been delivering. Columbia, for their transferred audio objects for 7 years now. All was well and good until one day Columbia asked if we could do the same for video objects. This begins to complicate things because the AES schema used in the AMD sec only apply to audio. So what were we to do? So when seeking a solution, Morgan was inspired by Karen and Wilson's 2008 AMIA presentation entitled PBCore, METS, Premise, Mods, METS Rights, Oh My. Indeed. In this presentation, Karen explained the way they combined PBCore, Premise, and Mods using METS documents in order to meet the needs of preserving digital public television project. We had come across the slides of her presentation on the web sometime earlier, and when we heard Columbia's request, Morgan knew who to approach with questions. After speaking with Kara, and reading through the PBCore documentation, we discovered that PBCore allows for instantiation level documents to be validated. What does this mean? So before we move on, just a little bit of a vocabulary lesson. In PBCore parlance, there are terms for describing different levels of intellectual content and assets. A higher level term is description document. This describes the intellectual content as a whole. For example, with Metropolis by Fritz Lang, the description of the intellectual content of Metropolis, such as the title, subject, writer, and director, would fall under the description document. The instantiations, on the other hand, describe the different versions of Metropolis, such as a 35mm print, a VHS, a DVD, and even different cuts of the film. In our previous experience using PBCore to describe digitized objects, we were used to creating description level documents. These documents describe the intellectual content as a whole, along with all the associated instantiations, which in this case include the physical object and each digital derivative. After speaking with Kara, Morgan learned that PBCore supports documents at the instantiation level, which can be described as just a single instantiation. So rather than using the description section of PBCore, we're going to stick with the METS framework that Columbia developed and use the Dublin Core description and then just use the instantiation part for the administrative level. This means that the analog video objects and each of their digital derivatives could be described by their own instantiation document, and each of these could be validated individually before being inserted into the METS. So our METS is the sum of different pieces, each of which is being independently validated within their native schema. What we suggested to Columbia was that we replace the AES metadata and the audio metadata, the audio METS documents, with PBCore. The two main selling points with PBCore had an element for every data point that Columbia wanted. In other words, the format was able to store all the necessary information, and also we were already done with most of the work when creating the system for audio. All we needed to do was to clean up some of the code to reference video rather than audio and replace AES metadata with PBCore metadata. So within the repository, it's still a METS document. It's just this one section that's tuned to a different metadata standard. So Columbia liked the idea, and it was time to move forward. We developed a workflow around it, which we'll give you a quick tour of. There are a number of software tools and management methods we use to ensure that these processes run smoothly. First, Columbia exports from their catalog to Excel the descriptive metadata about the object provided to us, and we import that into our FileMaker database. Each original object becomes represented by a FileMaker record, and all the information known about that object is associated with the record. Next, a transfer engineer transfers the tape to a digital master file. For analog objects, Columbia uses JPEG 2000 wrapped in NXF, an OP1A file. Next, our automation system tests the ingest master to be sure that it meets the spec. So before it will be forwarded into the creation of derivatives in the METS, there's a control point here in quality control as the file is created. We do this by probing the file using media info and comparing the information harvested from the object against the specifications that are set up in the project in our database. If the file has the wrong frame size or is the wrong format, it throws an error. And there may be perfectly good reasons for this. If we're doing mostly analog objects and you end up with one DV tape, it won't queue to the spec, and then you can fold it through, and so it will be valid, but it will still throw the error. If it's correct, it gets sent to the render farm where the derivative files are made. Now it's time to create the METS files. In this case, one METS file per video object. The user runs an Apple script, see up the left-hand corner, which asks FileMaker to compile everything it knows about the tape and its derivatives. So this will be all the catalog information that Columbia sent us. It'll tell us about the machines that made the playback the tape, the software we used, the engineer, and on which date. All that information is stored in the database. And that's coming from FileMaker. And that gets mapped into the MEDS document that we're building. Next, the script feeds the digital files paths to media info to create PBCore technical metadata. And so in this case, we're asking the files what they are rather than merely declaring it. So if the files are incorrect, at least the metadata is honest and true to what the file is. Then finally, the script asks Finder to verify the location of the files, which tells us that the file paths are accurate, and those get entered into the structure method. And that's how George Floyd Audio developed the MET schema using PBCore to help Columbia manage digitized video objects. Now at this point you may be thinking, this is somewhat interesting, but how does all this affect you, and where does all the meta narrative begin? Why does this matter? Well, when discussing with anybody how to manage, store, or transmit data, there's one talking point that Morgan and I keep coming back to. In fact, it's become something of a mantra around us: don't reinvent the wheel. And here's why we say this. Morgan's really lazy. Well, not exactly, and that's actually, this is why my people do such great work, because we give them plenty of time to rest at work. But if somebody's already done the hard work, and you want to use that work, then do it. If somebody knows the answer to your question, ask them. The time this saves you gives you more time to do the tasks that you're specialized to do, rather than trying to learn new tasks others have already figured out. It's like, why develop your own metadata schema? Metadata is only useful so long as it can be easily accessed and transmitted. That is why the use of standards and controlled vocabularies are so critical. If, as a community, we can decide how to represent and store metadata, we can ensure long-term access and readability. You can develop the most thorough, intuitive, and descriptive metadata standard the world has ever seen, but if that standard isn't widely documented, broadly adopted, it will not prove useful for long-term preservation or access, which is, after all, what you're trying to do. Our example of the day is VideoMD. Are you going to cut me off? This is a place, or? Okay. Between 2000 and 2003, the Library of Congress created VideoMD as part of the audiovisual prototyping project. This metadata standard was meant to be used in METs to describe video objects in the same way that Columbia uses PBCore. We first were introduced to this. It was an inquiry that came across the technical committee listserv at EASA, and I said, Morgan, take a look at this. So we looked at it prior to that, so he opened up the schema and found that it looked pretty good. And there are a number of elements for holding important information about digital and physical objects. So at first glance, Sabine was thinking, hey, this looks pretty usable as a metadata statement. And the web page had an XSD which outlines the XML schema, and it all made sense. However, on the website, we saw this following note, that it would be, in 2011 and 2012, subject to further elaboration. So it looks like it had been abandoned. Well, that doesn't mean that a user community might not have developed around it, so we found the listserv associated with it, which contained one entry, where a gentleman asks, all in caps, in Spanish, how do I put 5 videos on, or 5 movies on a DVD without losing too much quality? But no, there was not an answer. So we delved further, and we contacted Carl Fleischauer at the Library of Congress, who put us in touch with some other people, and everybody responds as, well, we just used it because we don't use it because nobody nobody's using it. So as far as we could tell, it has been abandoned essentially because nobody was using it. The bottom line is people moved on in video and the adopted, despite its good characteristics, it's had something left in the middle. So if you don't adopt standard, no use. Compare this, PBCore. I need some, like a C major chord, this part in the sun running through. So, Morgan was able to find the presentation that Kara had made on the topic for PBCore and METS at AMIA in 2008, which then informed our recommendations to Columbia. This allowed us to call upon existing code base, as well as the existing PBCore documentation, which has recently been revamped with the release of PBCore 2.1. And lastly, successfully pulling this off has given Morgan more experience in documentation to add to the recently revamped PBCore documentation. So it's feeding back Snowball, whom by all hold hands. With the hope that it will inform other users and institutions as to what to do when they face similar obstacles and when you use certain methods. In the end, what we're hoping for is you will take away from this presentation is that the PBCore community is extremely understanding of how important adoption is in the success of a metadata standard, and that it's part of what everybody who was here, everyone who he wrote it. Everyone who had everyone here who has spoken to is getting at. So the update from 2.1 to from 2.0 to 2.1 and then on 3.0 represents the community's understanding that a schema isn't perfect, and that through committees and participation we can move toward a more robust schema that meets the needs of users across multiple disciplines. The decision to merge the EBU ontology was to get PBCore working with the Semantic Web and without starting from square one. The updated documentation, webinars, and glossary are all resources made available to give new and current users information they need to make decisions about how they use PBCore. You just sit down with a raw document and you're going to be snoozing fast. The changes requested on GitHub are there because the community wants to know how institutions are using PBCore and what changes can be made to improve it. Additionally, the latest news from the front is that MIT will be adopting the METS schema using PBCore that were developed for Columbia, describing its digitized audio and video objects. So, we're not reinventing the wheel either. Rather, we're pooling our resources to try and make sure that the wheel will have something that people want to use and know how to use it for years to come. And there's some resources. The validator is up on our website, and there's the links to the presentations.